Yeah, well, it's always stressful, no matter how you approach it. I mean, go lives are, you're actually opening up your new site to your public, to your customers. So it's always exciting, but you can definitely minimize the excitement around it, or the fear maybe involving around it, or the cold feet that you might have.
Yeah.
So what we like to do in our projects is kind of introduce a soft launch. So not go with a full blown big bang where you introduce maybe your new design or replatforming to Commerce Cloud. So what we generally want to take on is a two-phased approach in our beta launch. So what we will do is have a private beta, which basically means you'll put the site in production, but you'll only open it up to preferably just the client personnel. And that makes sure that you can test your site properly with more people than just the development team or the testers that you might have allocated to the project. Making sure people use it and see how the checkout flow goes, how the order flow goes, general like user experience things that you want to be checked.
So you would put it up, but you put it behind a password, I guess. You keep it hidden from the public, and you then invite people in, and you ask them to buy something on it.
Exactly that. So you start with a separate domain, and indeed password protected, because only invited people you want to expose the site to. Maybe offer them like a nice discount so they could actually start buying the products. But it's going to be your own personnel first. So you want to get the company involved and excited about the new site. So you'll be testing, but you'll learn, and with those learnings that you can incorporate into a new release, and then your new release on still the beta site, you'll remove the password protection and making it slowly accessible to your customers. And the way you could do that is already on your current site, like show up a pop-up or a banner that will invite your customers to your new beta site. Like, hey, check it out. This is our new site. You want to try it. And you can control that pop-up or the banner by setting a percentage of traffic that you want to have that banner shown to, for example.
So typically, how long would you have a site in this private test mode before you go to the soft launch of beta? And then how long typically do you think a beta runs, or is that enormously variable?
It can be it can be variable depending on the changes in the landscape behind it. But I would say varying from a 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks if it's like a huge change all over the e-commerce landscape. Somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks per beta phase is sufficient to kind of like build your confidence and get the learnings and the improvements in for the next phase.
Okay, so you call it a beta phase. What do you mean by phase?
Yeah, it's more or less related to the period that it runs. So the first phase is the private beta, so keeping it for your personnel only. And the second phase in beta would be public, opening it up slowly to part of your customer base. And then the last phase of the full, I would say, launch phase would be then the actual go live. So then the site is in full production mode on your current URL. So the beta URL will disappear and will point to the new domain. And really the way we want to do that is you want to minimize the risk of having a sales drop. Because obviously you need to get used to your new site with maybe new order flows in place, but also your customers based on the new design. And you want to like test run it or dry run it.
Okay, so what are you evaluating during these phases then? I guess you have a sort of criteria you're looking at to say, have we ticked all of our boxes? Have we met all our marks? And what are those?
Well, you want to generally have Google Analytics up and running when you start doing these beta phases, so private or public, which allows you to monitor what happens on the site and see if there's significant drop-off in either of the in any of the flows that you'll have. So you can check the user experience, maybe get direct feedback from your personnel when they are trying out the site based on their user experience. So you can improve the user experience, but you could also just check the more technical elements to see, like, is the order actually coming in? Is the order flowing through your OMS? Is the invoicing, is that going okay? All these kind of things. Obviously, all things that you can very well test within the development phase. But when opening it up to a broader public, you'll have other people using the site that maybe you haven't thought of, like use cases, maybe the amount of products that they add to the cart, combination of products that could be different. So it's a very good way to already see from a user experience and also from a technical perspective to see how the site performs.
Right. Yeah. Customers are guaranteed to go and do the things you didn't expect them to. Whereas
Exactly.
all of the use cases you've been testing with developers are all the obvious ones, but you've usually forgotten some edge cases and guaranteed if
Yeah,
it can be broken, it's going to be broken.
for
That,
sure, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and definitely with the customers, I think it's also important that you'll improve the site in really nitty gritty details. So if they don't understand something in your checkout, you want to fix that before all of your customers will see the site. So you want to make sure you really change those little things that are unclear, which will prevent people from completing their checkout.
Okay. So although I asked you how long would it take, really the answer is until it's working properly. So you in a best case scenario, it might be a week or so, and you just do your tests, everything works great, you flip it and go live. But maybe in a worst case scenario, you find there's a major issue, maybe like performance, for example. Suddenly you have more customers and it just can't handle the load, and you have to do some quite significant retooling to get that. So what's
Yeah.
the worst case you've seen, without revealing any names? And but I mean, what give me a kind of oh wow, we're really good job that we did this soft launch, because it would have been a disaster if we'd gone live otherwise.
I think the main thing, so the user experience things are mostly things that you could still, it's okay if they're still, you're going to be continuously improving your site anyway, so that would be okay. I think one of the things that I've seen in a previous project are things dealing with finance. So rounding issues in terms of combination of products to your card, having a promotion and Commerce Cloud deals in a certain way with rounding numbers, and then sending that to an ERP system and that clashing. And that's definitely edge cases that you couldn't have tested before, or you could have, but you wouldn't have known because it's a certain combination of items, numbers, and promotions.
Okay, so the order gets sent to the ERP system, and the ERP system says this doesn't add up quite right.
Exactly. I have something different because I've got my information from maybe the payment service provider, and then that clashes.
Right.
And there's a 1 cent difference, which is really important to their
Yeah.
financial systems.
We work on multi-country sites. So do you then adopt this process when you're rolling out to new markets as well? For instance, imagine you're live in the Netherlands and Belgium, and you want to go to France. Is it the same process in that situation, or are there differences?
I would say it can be different. So the experience that I have, or that we have in projects, is normally we do it only with the first rollout, because then the platform is new. So it's really just with replatforming and redesign that you want to do a beta approach. With rollouts to new countries, your site is already in production, and most of the times it's a copy or someone very related to the first country you've set up. So it's not necessarily the case for rolling out to a new country. Although you could apply the same process, obviously, when you want to improve your user experience, and there's local differences in the way that users behave. For example, Netherlands versus, I don't know, US. There could be differences. You might want to test run that. But it doesn't have to be the case necessarily.
There's a desire sometimes to set a date to launch something, especially, for instance, if you've got, say, a Black Friday or Christmas coming up. So how would you plan this when there's, let's say, a time pressure to meet certain seasonal moments, when they know that if you are live, you're going to get a very significant bump in sales?
Yeah, good one. That really takes preparation, and it really takes an MVP mindset. So minimal viable product. So you want to make sure that your first beta release, so the private one, is maybe not the full site. So you could imagine that you want to have the pages available that will allow a customer to go through the checkout and place an order, which means you might not need the account pages. So you could already start your beta release with just that, really, just the basic flow. and then slowly adding more pages and more functionalities to it while you go into public beta. So opening it up for your actual customers rather than your personnel, because they might be more forgiving, your personnel, than your customers are. Although my experience is also that if you explain to customers they're visiting a beta site, they're very honored most of the times that they can try it out for you, and they're very forgiving in the things that might not be there or might not be working yet, as long as they are informed, and you might want to offer them an incentive to try it out. So you could still have a set go live date, taking into accounts like special dates like Black Friday, but making sure you kind of plan backwards from that date, having your beta launches.
Okay, and is it maybe a situation where you might say this is our MVP and these are some nice to have features, and then based on progress and also based on our soft launch success metrics, maybe some of those nice to have features, they might meet the deadline, or if not, we'll push them into the next release afterwards?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then does that mean you can also apply this soft launch to additional rollouts? For instance, imagine you have maybe you've done your version 1 and then you're doing an update. Is there a way to do a similar beta rollout of these new features on top of the existing platform?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I think that is where like an A/B testing mechanism kind of comes into play. Because with the site being in production and already on the actual domain, you don't have, or actually you lack the options to use a beta domain for it, but you'll definitely have options to still assign traffic to a certain version of your site, and then test drying those new features.
Right. It seems crazy that people wouldn't do this.
Right? I know. Why would you want to go with like this full big bang and it's all like, you just don't know, like go into the deep end. But yeah, it's often, it also often has to do also with cold feet, to want to present your customers with something that's not completely finished. And that takes a little bit of change in mindset, and not wanting everything to be perfect, but just making sure it gets out there so you can benefit from the learnings from it and people using it.
Yeah, that's switching to really thinking internet, because if you're launching a physical store, you need to finish the store and then you open the doors, and at that point it's got to be all there. Or even traditionally people would make brochures or a catalog. Once you've sent that thing to the printers to print your catalog to mail to people, you're not changing it once it's been printed. So whereas of course with a website, it's a continually and always a work in progress.
Yeah, so I think the whole continuous improvement, continuous learning cycle really fits into doing soft launches and trying things out, really.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's both absolutely soft launch your big releases very carefully to make sure that there's no issues with the technology, user flows, but also when you come up with significant new features to use that process again, essentially. So make it a continuous and ongoing part of how you work.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you communicate this to people? Because I would say there's obviously people who are deep in the project and they're going to understand, but what's the way that you would, if they're maybe do you struggle to communicate this to people? Or when you say we want to soft launch, is there something that people broadly in business accept? They're like, yeah, that's fine, that makes total sense.
Yeah, so normally they're quite okay with having this approach. There are occasions where you kind of need to have some more conversation around the public launch, so really opening up to the public. So that's the whole mindset of learning and improving, and showing something to your customers that might not be like perfect yet. So generally everyone is quite okay with doing a private soft launch because it stays within the group of the company, more or less. Taking that step to invite customers is often, well, it can result in a little bit of cold feet, but once you start having the conversation and making sure people understand the mindset of, well, actually using the internet to your benefit, because it can change so rapidly. So if something isn't working on Monday, we can change it and have it adapted on Tuesday. So once people kind of get into that mindset, the next step is quite okay to have that public soft launch.
Okay, so it's explaining, it's making sure that people who come from a more traditional mindset understand how flexible the internet is, and that because people are visiting a web server, you can always change what's on the server at any time. Nothing is set in stone.
Exactly. And also keep in mind that probably because you're working at a certain place, you'll be viewing that site most likely daily. But the majority of your customers wouldn't visit your site on a daily basis, especially if, for example, you're in fashion. It might be, I don't know, once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month.
Mm.
So people wouldn't have such an attachment like you would have to your own website. So they might not even notice that something has changed. I have one example doing a soft launch for a client before, and we had significantly changed the design. And there was feedback asked from customers who would see it for the first time, and no one noticed the change in design.
I have coached clients to see that as a compliment, to be honest. And I also, for UXers especially, a really, really fantastic user experience is essentially invisible. So the best, often the best test results from a good user experience is that nobody noticed, which is tough if you want the user experience designer, what's praised, and people go, that's an amazing user experience, and that people notice it when it doesn't work, and they don't notice it when it does. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's also something to take into account when considering soft launches, because I don't think there's really a need for those like cold feet, because people will often either not notice it or forgive you for it because they feel special enough to be able to test it for you.
I've also noticed there is now the general public is, and you said this already a bit with the being invited to a beta, there is an understanding that the internet is not 100% reliable. So especially if something is new and you're setting up, something doesn't quite work, then you can just say, yeah, we're working on it. It'll be working soon. Come back tomorrow or whenever. People are a lot more forgiving than say if your phone doesn't work, for example, or your television. So it's its own sort of
And I
expectation.
would say the word beta is the magic word in this case. So keep using that, and people will know and understand it's not 100% yet, and they will be okay with it.
Okay, so I'll have one last question for you then. Beta or beta?
Woohoo! Potato, potato.
GIF or GIF, yes.
Yeah,
All right, both are fine, let's say.
go with anything.